everybody to Flat Irons Tuning. We are in the shop, and we have got, you know what, I'm going to say two special guests. We've got Tony from Turning Concepts joining us here.
Hey guys.
But in the bay, we have Mike Aumick's Time Attack car, which Turning Concepts supports, and Tony's here with it. And so now we have the opportunity to ask all sorts of questions about this car. So Tony, maybe just as a start to get into this, how did you guys start working with Mike Aumick, and what state was the car at when you first started building it?
So Mike bought the car brand new in 2008. It was immediately a race car. It's never really been a daily driver, never been a street car. He bought it for autocross way back in the day, and did that for, I think, close to 9 years or so, mostly autocross. He's from Western Michigan area, and that's really the home of Gridlife.
Okay.
Was Western Michigan, and a little track called Gingerman, which he's about a half hour from. And kind of got hooked into doing some track stuff, some time attack stuff with them, and started changing focus of the car from autocross into track and into time attack. And it went from very quickly into aero development and more power, and really prepping it strategically and specifically for that. We ended up meeting up with him actually through our tuner, Corbin Johnson, just to tune the car.
Mm-hmm.
He had put a bigger turbo kit on it, new engine, was trying to make 600 horsepower, and ended up at the shop for us to tune it. Okay. And that's when I got to meet Mike. That was probably 4-ish years ago, maybe 5 years ago, a little fuzzy at this point. And just kind of went from there. We saw some things that were, hey, like you could do this and this, and it would probably work a little bit better on track. We've got some track experience. This is what we've done in the past. Let us help you out a little bit. And then it kind of just progressed from there to the point where he was seeing that in order to really go fast and have a shot at winning events, the car just needed a pretty consistent level of prep.
Sure.
And that's when we kind of took the car and the project over, brought it in-house, and really started doing basically everything on the car with the help of some partners that we have.
Right.
But we do really the main prep, the main delivery, trying to do the whole thing. Yeah. And that's how the car has gotten to this point.
Well, in what class does he run in? What class did he start at, or what is it currently running in?
So in Gridlife, it's always been in street mod.
Okay.
Which is their most popular class by entrance. I mean, there are tons and tons of cars that run street mod. It is a very open class in terms of what you can do to a car, while still having some very limiting rule sets, like around tire size.
Is that the biggest limiting factor in that class, would you say?
For sure, right now, yeah. I mean, we are limited to a 255 wide tire in an all-wheel drive car, and has to be 200 tread. So that really leaves only a couple tires that you really, have confidence in that are going to go fast enough.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for us, that's the limiting factor. And we're, we look at what we're pulling from a lateral G perspective. I mean, we're still pulling incredible lateral G on a 255 tire.
Yeah.
If we go up to 285 or 305 or something, I mean, the car would be even more of a monster.
Yeah. We know that the car is competitive, but would you say that this car naturally was competitive in that class, or did you guys have to do a lot of work to get it to the point where it was competitive in that class?
It's a lot of fine tuning.
Okay.
Everyone starting out, always thinks about, I need to add more power, I need a wing and a splitter, and then I'm gonna win. That's kind of the natural progression of a lot of these cars. And what you find out is that you do need all that stuff. You need power because everyone else that's winning has power.
Right.
You need aero because everyone else that's winning has aero. You're not gonna get the effective stick to the ground that you need without it. But there's a huge difference between where the amateur will start off with doing these things and where it will move more toward a professional take on aero, especially aero. And then power and longevity and reliability in that power. You can make 600 horsepower in Subaru for 10 seconds. It's not too hard to do.
Right.
But try to do that over the course of a weekend when your lap time is a minute and a half, 2 minutes long.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff you have to do to try to make it reliable and last.
Right.
So that's where we've moved in to try to help him as much as we can to just make the car as reliable as possible. The more reliable it is, the less we have to spend fixing it, which means we have more money for upgrades.
Well, and it's so important as a driver to be able to drive the car, get out, get the car on track, spend time in the car on track, refine your driving, get into the right mindset to go fast versus get out there, do 2 turns, something is wrong, pull back in the pits. Right. Figure it out again.
Yeah, it's really tough. And one of the things that we can't go out and do hour-long stints in this. I mean, the car
Right.
will not survive. I mean, it is a time attack car.
Yeah.
It is designed to do like 2 hot laps max. I mean, that is it, and then
Right.
it has to go through a cool down session. But even still, being able to do 2 hot laps consistently, maybe within like a 70% lap as a cool down lap, I mean, it gives you seat time. It's not as much seat time always as you need.
Right.
But that, along with some test days that we do, really help to give seat time.
Well, getting to the point where you can do 2 hot laps consecutively, I mean, that lets you get into a groove. You're not worrying about the car. And then that's where reliability is so important, because if you only have those 2 hot laps, I mean, you need to be able to use that time.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I mean, anybody who watches like F1 would know that when those guys go out there from a qualifying perspective, if you look at their qualify time versus their race pace time, they can be, last weekend, for example, 5 or 6 seconds off.
Yep.
You know, and you think about 5 seconds and being able to put that lap together. Every single corner, every single braking zone, every single turning point, track out has to be absolutely perfect. The only way you get that is by having the reliability and being comfortable with the car.
Yeah.
Having the seat time to know what the car is going to do to push it.
Yeah.
And know it's going to stick, or at least hope that it's going to stick.
For sure.
You know, it's about the most you can hope for.
So speaking about reliability, what are some of those challenges that you ran into with this car? And can you give us kind of some behind the scenes, some of what the solutions you guys came up with?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the least reliable part that most people think of when they think of a high horsepower Subaru is the engine.
Yeah.
And it can be. I mean, we've gone through many years of blowing up our own race engines to figure out how to build an engine that survives in this sort of environment. And, you know, still nothing's perfect and you still have problems with it. But what we've done is learn how to limit those problems, you know, to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And it really comes from understanding that, you know, this engine needs to live in a very high RPM window. You know, so it's not like your street car where most of the time you're between 1 and 4,000 RPM.
Right.
You know, this car is really between 4 and 9,000 RPM. And that's where it lives basically its whole life.
Right.
So we have to design an engine system that is happy living at that rev range, which, you know, kind of goes through the entire gamut of the construction of the internals of the block, you know, the rod ratio.
Well, this is the Long Rod 4 millimeter Long Rod engine that Turning Concepts built. So this is a very special custom built engine for this car.
Yeah.
It was in the development. Now that's something that you guys have as an offer.
That's right, yeah, and it's something that we toyed around with and we played with some of our other friends and partners that we had in this for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time to kind of bring it to market and start to push it as like, this is the way to go for a track car. But yeah, I mean, it's a long rod, short stroke engine. Instead of uses a 2.5 block, so it's still a 2.5 bore, but as a result of the modified geometry of it, it's down to a 2.34 liter.
Right.
So the 2.34 liter really allows it to be happy in the upper RPM ranges of life.
And the Long Rod. So both of those, just the build of the engine is what lets it work well and reliably in that range.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other things that go into it. You know, the oiling system, for example, trying to make that work. And this still has a wet sump on it.
It does have a wet
This
sump.
does not yet have a dry sump on it. We actually did lose, we lost an engine in Autobahn earlier this year, which is something I'd never seen before with the little, I wouldn't even call it a factory defect. But there's a little ball bearing that gets pressed into an oil port and the ball bearing popped out and we lost all oil pressure. Never seen it before. I mean, been building engines for these things for almost 20 years.
Right.
I've never had that happen. It's the first time. But still running a wet sump set.
Okay.
And it's not because we don't want to go to a dry sump. Part of it is because we understand the limitations of budget. I mean, you know, there's a very strict budget that this car has to live within.
Sure.
And as well, most of our customer base cannot afford a dry sump. You know, they're out there on a wet sump.
Right.
And we want to make sure that our products, and one of the things that we've always done is to make sure that our products are developed in a way that we can sell them to our everyday consumer, our everyday customer.
So that you know that the oiling system that the majority of Subaru people are going to use is going to work well with the engine that you've developed.
We all know a dry sump, you know,
Yes.
set up properly is going to work really well.
Yeah.
But the questionable thing is, can you make a wet sump in a high lateral G car work really well?
Which is not always easy.
No. And this has some unique parts on it. We've got a unique combination of wet sump parts in order to try to make that happen. Pulling some parts from some manufacturers and some parts from other manufacturers, and finding ways to put them together, just things that we like from each.
Sure.
And it's now, I mean, with the new setup that we put in place about 2 months ago, it's the best we've ever seen.
Okay.
So very, very minimal oil drop, even at like 1.8 lateral G, sustained, which we have to get now to about just over 2 seconds of sustained lateral to start to see a little drop. Okay. And then even so, that drop is only about 10 PSI now. Okay. That drop used to be 40, 45 PSI after about a second. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's gone
That's
a
big difference.
Huge difference.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk data, because I'm guessing that this is not running the stock ECU.
No.
So what have you done for engine management?
So we ran the stock ECU for a long time, just using an access port to tune it. And it was really good. I mean, it was a great tool for the power we were making at the time and for what we were doing with the car. But one of the things that we were trying to prevent is engine failure. We were trying to make the system more reliable. And one of the ways that you can do that is by building safeties into the ECU programming to shut down the engine in the case of an event, like an oil pressure drop. Yeah. You have no ability to do that on a factory ECU, well or consistently or reliably. So we went to a Motec ECU, an M150, and then also a Motec dash with the data collection on it in order to monitor and then also in order to make sure that we are shutting the engine down if things happen. So we went into adding a bunch of different sensors. So we have coolant pressure that we run, which is very important to know that if we're having any kind of issue with head gasket problems. Obviously oil pressure, oil temperature. We run 4-cylinder EGT, so one on every bank. And all of those together help us to have a better picture of what the engine's doing to know if there's a problem. And it's saved us many times over because of how it works. I mean, if the condition exists as we write them that, there's a safety problem, literally the engine will, in some situations, just shut down and shut off. In other situations, it will not. It'll shut off the throttle so that you can't get back on the gas and continue to rev it out into a range where it's not happy.
And hopefully all this before any kind of real significant damage occurs.
Right. And that's the main thing, dropping, and that's one of the ways that we really found the oil pressure issue that we had as we started to make the car go around corners faster, was the car started to shut down on us more frequently. And we're like, okay, what's going on? Why is it doing it?
You were hitting the fail-safes more.
Yeah. And thankfully, it's really easy for us when he comes back in to plug into the dash to be able to pull that information, to be able to look at the alarms. We know exactly what alarm occurred. We know exactly where on track it occurred. It has a track map that comes up so we can see exactly at what corner it was at. And then dive into the data to see, is this a one-off incident? Is this a trend, over all corners of this type, at this lateral G, if we're talking about oil pressure? It really just allows us to hone in on that so that we can target a fix, as opposed to attempting to throw parts at it or whatever.
And guessing. I mean, it seems like having that ability to watch and collect data and really have a good picture of what the operating systems of the car are doing, sounds like that was a key piece of the puzzle to make the car reliable.
Right. Yeah. And then there was also some performance things that we wanted to do with it that we weren't going to be able to do well with the factory ECU.
Sure.
Like rolling anti-lag if we want it. Launch control if we ever need it with lots of adjustability. Even going in and working with the ABS system that's in the cars as a Bosch Motorsports M5 ABS system. So being able to work well with the ABS system as opposed to running the ABS entirely in a standalone state. All of that, the Motec gives us the flexibility to do.
Sure.
So,
what about from a performance standpoint? I mean, would you say that Subaru is a car that will be inherently competitive in the street body class, or is it something where you had to kind of arm wrestle it to the point where now it is competitive?
I think we've stuck with this platform so long because we really like the platform and it means something to us. I mean, we've been working with them for almost 20 years and just really like the car and the brand, but it's definitely not the most competitive platform. The more you turn a Subaru into a race car, the more the weight balance goes awry. You end up with it being heavier and heavier in the front, which is not what you want.
And lighter in the rear.
Yeah, it always ends up lighter in the rear and heavier in the front. It's not a great platform. It's got a strut-based suspension, which is not fantastic, in the front. So you have some geometric challenges in terms of making it, really stick to the ground. And then, like we've talked about from a reliability perspective,
Yeah.
I mean,
There's some challenges.
Subaru never designed this to be a road race car. I mean, or a road
And
race
especially
engine.
not at that power level.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with full aero and everything else. I mean, so there's challenges, and there's a lot of other cars that are just naturally faster. You know,
Sure.
Look at like Jackie Ding and his Subaru.
Right.
He's a fantastic driver. I mean, don't get me wrong, he is awesome. But that car is also awesome.
Sure.
I mean, a crazy fast shifting transmission, 600 plus horsepower, reliably out of a stock engine,
Yeah.
and you can run 285s because it's rear wheel drive.
Right.
So, and just naturally, if you look at the frontal area of a Subaru, I mean, it's a brick.
Yeah.
Compared to a Supra, which is much
Really
lower, much more
much more
slick.
aerodynamic, slippery. Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things, like if you compare this to like my Tesla that I have,
Yeah.
the coefficient of drag on the Tesla is far less than this is.
Right.
And everything that we've done to this car has only made it worse.
Right.
I mean, the aero really only creates drag
Right.
in a lot of ways for what we're doing. So yeah, I mean,
So from a performance standpoint, like where are the key places that the car needs attention to get it to be more competitive? Is it mostly suspension? Is it aero? Is it both?
there's a lot of suspension stuff that most of it can be set up like foundationally. There's a lot of really good resources out there for learning how to set this up. And all of the stuff that's on this car is really off the shelf stuff that anybody can go buy. The one exception is the dampers that are on the car. We worked with FEAL Suspension to really come up with a custom valving for this, and the aero load, the tires. I mean, it's very custom to this car.
But the good part with FEAL is they're willing and able to work with you if need be.
Yeah, they're great, and I can I work with them all the time on stuff like this, and I can give them the specs of the car, the corner balance, the overall weight, the aero load, the tires, and say, okay, set me up with something that's going to do X, Y, and Z in a two-way adjustable damper. And that's essentially what we've done with this. And they are phenomenal. I mean, the dampers are absolutely incredible for what the car can do. Always planted, I mean, always amazing. But all the other suspension stuff, I mean, that you're going to use to get the car to stick is all off-the-shelf stuff. And there's a lot of parts on it. I mean, drop knuckles in the front that we're using from Wisefab. A bunch of arms in the rear that we're doing, and obviously, really no factory bushings anywhere. So there's a lot of work that has gone into it, and then the rest of it is testing and setup.
So it's suspension geometry, and then setting it up, getting the alignment right, getting the setup right to make it actually really work and really stick.
And that's where we can take it one step further than your average person can, because I've been racing a long time in a lot of different series and a lot of different capacities. So for me, it's very easy to be able to look at the pressures and look at the temperature of the tires in order to make informed decisions about what needs to be done, with the alignment geometry to make the car work as good as it can. We still don't even have like shock potentiometers on this yet. That's something that is coming hopefully this winter.
Wow.
Again, something that feeds into the Motec very well, and one of the reasons we went with that system. But it's just understanding, and it's having a lot of background in suspension setup to be able to make the car work.
Yeah. Well, and we have to talk about aero because there's been so much done aerodynamically to this car.
Yeah.
How critical of the formula is that? Is getting front end grip from an aero standpoint and rear grip from an aero standpoint, and maybe everything in between in addition.
Right. I mean, it's incredibly important, and I think the thing that's what a lot of people don't understand is that it's very easy to say it has a splitter and the splitter fits within the rules. It has a wing and it fits within the rules. I mean, people see that and they immediately jump to that saying they need to do these things. But the difficulty with that is executing a splitter and a wing and aero package that makes the car stick to the ground, that increases downforce, that doesn't overly affect drag. Because it's very, I mean, especially again, starting off with this terrible aerodynamic shape here. Hatchback is not good for the purposes of building a race car, especially for high speed. It's very easy to make 600 horsepower, put all the aero on and go slower, because you just destroy the top speed of the car. And initially, we had a very kind of basic understanding of how to do the splitter and the wing. And then it started going into working with other people that we know. Again, all from a theoretical perspective, because the car's never been in a wind tunnel. But just to say, okay, we need to tweak the splitter angle to whatever degree in order to get the front to really, stick better.
Okay.
We need to tweak the wing angle and the height and the setback in order to reduce drag, but in order to still keep downforce going.
Yeah.
And then it's, okay, we need to look at different shapes of the leading edge of the splitter in order to increase speed of airflow under the car, as opposed to just having that flat plane that so many people have made of aluminite or something. Instead of trying to cut the air, you're trying to direct the air, and keep it smooth.
Smooth transition from the leading edge.
Right, and then even into the diffusers that are on the back of the splitter in order to try to focus on air exit now. So now you're not just focused on the air that's hitting the front, the leading edge of the car. Now you're focused on what that air is doing after it exits the leading edge. How does it interact with the rest of the car, both on the side? Where does that air go underneath the car, and what happens to it once it gets there?
Right.
And then what happens to the air as it exits the car? Also very critically important. So even in this situation, the placement of the exhaust specifically is done in order to interact with the diffuser in the wing.
And try to use that exhaust velocity.
Right. Trying to use the exhaust velocity to fill a void area in order to reduce drag.
So who did you work with to develop this package, or did you develop a lot of it in-house, or did you work with somebody outside?
It started with me kind of going through and doing, the stuff that I knew from my years of racing. And then there were some deficiencies that I was finding and some things that I wanted to change and do better. I don't have the technical know-how to work with carbon fiber in order to make like an inner foam carbon outer structure for this stuff. We've played around with it at the shop. We've never gotten that advanced. We do a lot of carbon repair work in the shop for splitters and things that get trashed in the process of racing. But we've never made like this splitter as complex of a design. So I worked with Professional Awesome. They were really, really great at helping me do some of the setup stuff when the aero was more basic. And then we started working with Spage Sport up in Canada, which they have done some absolutely incredible aero work for a lot of different cars.
Yeah.
We started working with Alex up there to say like, all right, Alex, I've got ideas. This is the stuff I want to do. How can we do it?
Right.
And it started off initially with the splitter. And the splitter is fantastic. It's a really, really cool design. Really awesome, like dual diffuser tunnels on each side. Just a great overall splitter design. Very, very stiff, yet very light for what it is.
Right.
And then it went into doing the wing. He was saying, okay, it's like, I've got a wing profile that we can use that will be much more downforce with much less drag at much higher angles of attack.
Okay.
I'm like, great, let's try it. And then, initially we did it. We had it higher, when we started with it. And again, what we realized even in that is that was creating more drag than we needed. The wing was so efficient at creating downforce that we could actually dramatically lower the wing, get it closer to the car so that it was more in the airflow of the car, and still have the same levels of downforce, but with far less drag. So, last year versus this year, same wing, just in a different placement. It was at Mid-Ohio, I think, 8 miles an hour is the difference in top speed.
Faster. Wow, that's a big deal.
Huge, huge deal. Yeah. So, I mean, it's honing the system, and then hopefully you'll see the floor that's on the car at some point. That was the last piece that we really did with him.
Okay.
Saying like, all right, I've got an idea for doing essentially a wing under the car in order to create a Venturi effect with tunnels that will fit within the rules of the class, but will help to really suck the car to the floor, or suck the car to the ground.
Like that is the hardest thing to do, like especially from a privateer's perspective or whatever. So like, to have gone to the point where you've got a fully formed floor of the car too, that's crazy. And
he did a fantastic job. And we had to send the car up to Canada in the middle of COVID. It's not easy. Trying to get it across the borders when they're like, why are you shipping a race car across borders? You have no reason to do that. I mean, the amount of pushback we got was incredible, just trying to get the car into Canada. And then what he had to do was, I think, much more of a project than any of us thought. It ended up taking him a couple months to get this right. He had to make sacrificial molds in order to get this really complex 3D shape.
Wow.
And then people started to see him at the beginning of the season. And Jackie Ding, who also works with Spage Sports, was really excited. And then called up Alex and was like, Alex, I need this floor. And Alex said, nope, never doing it again. So there was just so much work. He's like, I'm never doing it again. It was just way too much of a headache.
Wow.
So we're really lucky and have to be very protective of this because it's the only one in existence.
Yeah.
Replicating it would not be easy.
For sure. Well, and as you're developing that aero package, just maybe how important is it to have the ability to adjust and be flexible? Like with the rear wing, it's pretty easy to adjust the angle of attack.
Yep.
How important is it to have some kind of similar adjustment up front?
It is important, and we had to go through kind of a rebalancing for this event. This event has a really nasty bump that is kind of going as the track goes over a tunnel to get to the inner paddock.
This event being Gridlife Alpine Horizon.
Yep, at PPIR.
Yep.
It's got a really nasty bump, and we've seen this bump before. We've had some issues with bottoming out the splitter before, so we raised the entire car up.
Okay.
Kind of keeping the wedge that we wanted or keeping the rake that we wanted in the car that we have found works really well, but raised the entire thing up quite a bit in order to try to clear that bump, which then meant that we had to go back and readdress things like angle of attack on the wing, is it still where we want it? The angle of attack on the splitter, is that still where we want it?
Right.
All of that is adjustable and all of that feeds in. You don't do a whole lot with the splitter once you kind of get it set.
Right.
It's normally like get it set to a happy angle where it's working and just kind of leave it
Right.
alone. The wing we adjust all the time in order
Sure.
to get that to do exactly what we want.
Get the
Tune
balance
the
right.
balance.
Yeah.
And it's pretty interesting how it works because it's working so well as a total system now that even just adjusting the wing, you feel an effect on the entire car, not just necessarily the rear. So we keep going up with the angle of attack in the rear in order to increase overall grip of the car. And eventually, as we get really high with that angle of attack, we'll start to notice where it's got too much grip in the rear of the car, and the front will start to wash.
Okay. Yeah.
And then we back it off a little bit from there. But it really does work as an entire system now.
Yeah.
Which is
So
awesome.
that ability to adjust and get it set up right, just with the suspension too, it's just such a critical detail to think of that level of adjustment when you're building it all.
Yeah, for sure.
Also, with all the work and all the time you've spent with this car, what is your favorite aspect or part of this car or thing that you've done?
I think two things. I love that floor. The floor of the car is really amazing, and it's really changed how this car drives. I think the second thing that I love, just because you rarely see it in this level of motorsports, is the ABS system.
Okay.
Subarus are known for having ABS integration issues or application issues where you go to get on the brakes really hard and it just doesn't really work. Like the pedal gets hard, goes into ice mode, the car doesn't want to stop, it fights back and pushes against the pedal, all kinds of problems. And that was something that we struggled with in this car for a while, especially as the speed increased, as the downforce increased on the car. The problem became more apparent. You could drive around it, but you were leaving time on the table to do that.
Right.
So finally getting the Bosch ABS system in really changed the car.
Okay.
To the point where you just really nail the brake pedal and you let it figure out what it's going to do.
Right.
And it's just fantastic. I mean, aero straight braking, it doesn't wobble around anymore under braking, and it just never does anything stupid. You barely feel ABS engage. It's working because the tires won't lock.
Right.
But you barely feel it upsetting the attitude of the car.
So it's an ABS system because it's a motorsports-based system that you can now actually use and lean into versus having to steer clear of.
Right.
Because it's a factory system.
Exactly. And so that was really one of the biggest changes. And, Mike, as a driver, he started to become nervous of the car. The faster the car became capable of going, he became more and more nervous with the brakes because he'd had so many issues with ice and just going off track and getting stuck in gravel traps because all of a sudden the brakes didn't work.
Right.
And again, you could kind of drive around it if you were really, really careful with how you applied the brakes and if you did it very progressively.
Right.
But going to this system has really instilled confidence in him.
Sure.
Now. And I think it's allowed him to drive much more aggressively and have a lot more confidence in the car now.
And as a driver, knowing that there's something like that's a third rail that you can't touch or you have to steer clear of, I mean, that's not confidence inspiring, and you're definitely that's always going to be on your mind.
Right.
And you're not going to be going for maximum time. You're going to be taking this corner, but making sure to avoid like this condition where all of a sudden the brakes might go out on you and you'd go off, versus taking that out of mind so that now you can really just focus on utilizing the car to its maximum potential.
Right. And if you're doing, 140, 150, 160 miles an hour, I mean, the last thing you want to think about when you're going into a braking zone is, are the brakes going to work?
Right.
And to go fast, especially from a time attack perspective, maybe in an endurance scenario, your mindset will be different, because you'll be thinking more about the car in how the car is reacting to your inputs in terms of, is it going to make it long term? You know, is what I'm doing to the car safe because I need to go another 8 hours, you know?
Right.
But from a time attack perspective, you need to really be focused in on what you are doing and making sure that everything you do is as fast as you can.
In those couple laps that you have, you've got to be able to use all of the car's potential in that couple laps.
Yep. So if you focus in on, are the brakes going to work? Oh, I better let off early and then get on the brakes a little bit early just to make sure.
Right.
I mean, that could be a half second.
Yeah.
And, you know, while a half second doesn't sound like a lot, as tight as this class runs now a lot of the time, I mean, that's could be the difference between first and fourth.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we've had some really tight events this year.
For sure.
And you got to get every little bit of time you can.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Well, it's just awesome that you were in the area. We were able to grab you and you were able to stop by. We really appreciate it.
Sure.
I mean, just thank you so much for making the time to come out here. Hopefully you guys at home like looking at the car. Really appreciate it. And to everybody watching at home, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support. And until next time, stay tuned to Flatirons TV.